Good evening, everyone. My name is Angela Keene. I'm the Community Outreach and Volunteer Coordinator for Domestic Violence Services of Lancaster. And I'm here with some friends to welcome you to a conversation about economic abuse and the way that we at Domestic Violence Services are working to help victims and survivors through that form of abuse and the new project that we have getting started to be able to do that. We also have some community partners here with us who are going to talk about the work that they do with folks in the community as well as victims and survivors. And we're going to go ahead and I'll introduce the panel to you, and then we'll watch a brief video and get started with some questions. So I'll start with Elizabeth. Elizabeth works at Domestic Violence Services of Lancaster. She is newly hired as our economic empowerment advocate. And this is a new position that's being funded through the All-State Foundation, the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and the Community Action Partnership. And it's because we recognize that there's more work to be done and more specialized services that can be provided to victims and survivors of domestic violence. When we talk about the statistics, we know that about 99% of victims are experiencing economic abuse in addition to the other forms of physical, mental, and verbal abuse in their relationships. And so we have the opportunity through some specialized funding to be able to do that and provide that additional support. So Elizabeth is going to be leading that program, not just working directly with victims, but also working with our community partners and helping to build that support system that will continue to support the victims and survivors we work with as they navigate through the community. So welcome, Elizabeth. We're really glad to have you on the team.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Great. We also have Sarah Popovich, and she is a licensed financial advisor for a nationally affiliated firm. We are also lucky to have her as a volunteer with Domestic Violence Services of Lancaster. And so obviously this is a topic that is of, I think, professional and personal interest as well for Sarah. And so we're really glad that she's here to help provide some advisory points as we begin this project overall at DVS. We also have Sandra Lopez, and she currently interns with us as a counselor at Domestic Violence Services of Lancaster. And by profession, she currently is a resource liaison in the navigation program at the Community Action Partnership, of which Domestic Violence Services is also a program. So we are fortunate enough to have Sandra here with us as well. And her specialty is doing just this work, is helping people to navigate through the community, finding their economic self-sufficiency. And finally, we have Randi from Tabor. She is the senior counselor at Tabor Community Services, one of our partner programs in the community. And she's been doing this work for nearly 20 years, I believe. And so she also has a specialty expertise as we talk about how people can navigate their economic situations and find the independence that they need to be able to support themselves and their families free from abuse and violence in their relationships. So we're going to start by looking at a video. It's about 3 minutes long, and I just want to warn everybody that, you know, the content is good and that sometimes hearing these stories and seeing the visuals that go along with them can be challenging. But it's really important for us to be able to face these conversations and these situations. So I'm going to play a video, and then that will help to frame some of the conversation we're going to have moving forward.
Process. Little by little, gradual process. It's a gradual process. Little by little, bit by bit. It's a cliche, I know, but he was the love of my life. We got married, new house in the country, I was pregnant, life was good. He thought I should leave my job. I was a bit sad, but the guys gave me a great send-off. 7 pounds, 6 ounces, a healthy baby boy. We called him Archie. And he was right. I could now stay home and look after our son. It's expensive having a baby. I was exhausted and lonely. So he offers to help by managing all the bills. Funny how you don't even really notice it at first. Then he suggested that I put all of my life savings into our joint account. Now we can pay off the mortgage quicker. He keeps telling me that it's not his money or my money, but it's our money. Little by little. Then he says that we need to be more careful with our spending. He puts me on a strict budget. I get £30 a week to pay for everything. I can't afford the petrol to take Archie to school. He just says that the walk is good for us. Bit by bit. He asks to see receipts for everything. He questions me on where I've been, who I've met, what I've spent. He took all my bank cards, and when I tried to access our bank account, I discovered that he's changed all the passwords. I tried to discuss it with him, but he just gets angry. He screams at me, slams doors, tells me I'm mad. It's just me. He blames me. He says it's my fault that I'm forgetful, that I'm stupid. I literally have to beg him for money. For food, petrol, everything. Sometimes I go hungry just so I don't have to ask. I'm scared. I've got no one to talk to. He hasn't actually hit me, so no one would believe me. I don't know what to do. I just want to get Archie and go, but I can't. I have no money and no way out. It's a gradual process.
So just as a reminder to folks, if there's any point in time during our conversation or after this conversation that you're experiencing trouble with processing what's happening or the conversations we're having, or you're a victim or survivor of domestic violence and need support, please don't hesitate to reach out to our 24-hour hotline by phone at 717-299-1249 or text the word SAFE to our text line, SAFE, to 61222. Elizabeth, I'm going to start with you. Well, let's sum up the video that we saw, right? So there's a woman and she marries a man. They, traditional kind of family situation. The couple gets married, then they, get pregnant, have a child. They're privileged enough for the wife and mother to be able to stay home with the child. And then, the couple is planning for their future. They join their bank accounts and their retirement funds and investments together. All of this seems very normal and pretty common, things that lots of families would like to be able to do. The woman in the situation, the wife and mother, is stressed out. And so the husband is perceived as helpful. It takes on the finances. to relieve some of the family pressures and stressors from her, and then ends up, walking down that road of control. So on the outset, this looks and sounds like lots of relationships that we might see around us, or kind of this fairy tale that we've all been sold, right? Boy meets girl, boy and girl gets married, have a baby. Like, all of this sounds very much like the things that we're told we should have or want to have. Elizabeth, we know that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men will experience physical violence in their relationships, and that's what people typically identify as domestic violence. But we also know that those of us who are working with victims and survivors, that the mental and verbal abuse has that really deep soul level impact. We hear those stories all of the time. We also know from research that I mentioned earlier that about 99% of victims experience economic control or abuse as part of the dynamics in their relationship that is abusive, and it's very often overlooked. So what was it from the video that you heard that you can point to being abusive? What forms of abuse or control can you just help identify for the audience?
Yeah, so it sounds really good at first because they have a really good relationship, as you mentioned, and then she gets pregnant, so her husband encourages her to stay home, which sounds great, except that also gives up a little bit of her control over finances, as well as a job or work that she's really enjoying. And we all know that sometimes your work is part of your identity. And so that's a little bit of a piece of her identity that is taken away. And then she might have a lapse in her work history, which also could, eventually down the road when she wants to get back into work, that could cause a problem for her. So that's a little bit of control there. Then also the husband suggests that they combine their investments and their retirement accounts, which is another form of control and another piece of her identity that she's giving up. If something should happen down the road, she doesn't have that control over that. And then the husband shoulders some of the household responsibilities by managing the finances, but he puts her on a very strict and unrealistic budget. She didn't have gas to take her son to school. He manages the bank accounts and then he shuts her out of them. And then she also might get debt in her name that she doesn't even know about because he has very easy access to start that. And as I said before, she gets locked out, so she doesn't have any kind of understanding of what her finances are. Probably one of the worst parts, though, is that there's no physical violence. I mean, it's good that there's no physical violence, but people are maybe not have a tendency to not believe her because she doesn't have that physical, that it's just the financial aspect of it.
So it's kind of invisible.
Right.
Much like even mental and verbal abuse, we know that those are kind of invisible forms unless there are people witnessing and hearing, some of those conversations, which sometimes happens. But when it comes to economics, we're also kind of serious about it and we don't talk about those things, right? Like that's even deeper at the back of the closet than maybe some of the verbal and emotional or physical abuse might be, because that's just not what we do. We don't, those are not conversations that we have generally with people, right?
Right. And now she doesn't have that support because people are, nobody wants to, like you said, nobody wants to talk about finances and they think she just needs to get it together rather than, giving her that support to help her get out of that relationship.
Right. And so they might also see him as, the helpful one, like he's taking on all of this while you're staying at home with the child. You should be grateful, sort of thing.
Right.
So what are some of the immediate impacts that you might see working with victims experiencing economic abuse, just even maybe beyond the fiscal aspect of the situation?
Yeah, so these kind of situations could cause low self-esteem. If you're in this type of relationship, you might feel trapped on how to get out of it because you don't have the means to be on your own. You lose your identity outside of the relationship. This becomes your entire world. sometimes with financial abuse, a secondary impact is sabotaging your job or school attendance. They encourage you not to work, which is a form of control. They encourage you not to go back to school to further your education. And then also they could be getting you ready or putting you in a situation where you're committing some kind of crime without even your knowledge, with fraudulent tax filing or credit card fraud, that sort of thing.
So, again, things that are happening, contributing to low self-esteem, loss of identity, these are often things that we hear victims of other forms of abuse also tell us as well. So we can really start to make some of those links and connections. Sarah, I want to bring you into the conversation here, and looking at your expertise around personal banking. What are some of the maybe more immediate realities that victims and survivors might face when they're experiencing economic abuse?
Well, I would say that the number one thing is that a victim might not have access to the money that they've earned or to the money that that the household has. When an abuser wants to lock out somebody else from the finances, for the victim, that can feel completely hopeless. They have no money to find another apartment. They have no access to money to buy food or support themselves or their child outside of that relationship. And that can be demoralizing. And it can also lead to low self-esteem and feeling trapped. So it's all part of that same conversation. And when it comes to economic abuse, it can also lead to long-lasting impacts on your credit history, which will essentially it could affect up to the rest of your life. It could affect the next 10 years, even after the relationship is over and there's no more abuse. You still have to deal with those impacts. And that can be very, very tough. And it can be a hard hole to dig out of after digging out of being physically or emotionally abused. And there's also damage to work history. Whenever there's long breaks in work history, that is something that's questioned. Even if you were a professional in your career before you left the workforce, taking time off and then going back means you've missed some progress. You need to catch up on that progress. So that can lead to earning less in the future. It can lead to not getting the job you'd want, taking a job outside of your experience, and that all can be financially damaging.
That's a great segue into my next question for Sandra. So tell us about the importance of an established work history for those seeking employment. I'm sure that you encounter this fairly regularly in your job. And how challenging is it to work with people with a broken work history to reestablish themselves in finding employment?
Well, from the perspective of the potential employer, so if when they look at a resume or an application and they see this gap, technically what they're looking for in the work history is for stability, responsibility, and experience. And somebody is lacking that part of that, immediately they probably are not going to even be considered for the position they had applied for. So it's unfortunately now these days with applications online or mailing in, it's so impersonal that sometimes the applicants or the survivors that we work with are not going to be able to explain what happened. So immediately their application is kind of put to the side and they go into who has a better work history. Now, this could be very challenging for our clients. And now these days, and everybody looking for employment, it could be very overwhelming for them to just not get calls back and why I don't get interviews. And somebody might have the experience, they might have gone to school, but because that gap is there's no explanation. They're just not getting the calls or the interviews they're seeking.
So at first glance, like they might not even get a serious consideration because somebody just sees that there's this gap and, oh, not worthwhile. We have other candidates.
Right.
And now, with the economy as it is, the job market is even tighter. Is that what your experience is?
Yes, it's very difficult for someone to that has been out of work, uh, get some like Sarah said, get the job that they really want.
Yeah. So Elizabeth, what are some of the barriers that we know exist in the community that might hinder victims and survivors from leaving abusive relationships and establishing that economic independence that they need?
Well, one thing would be inflated rents. And tied to that would be a lack of available and affordable rental units. We also see a lack of a living wage, making enough money to support a family, especially on one income. It's quite difficult. There's also a lack of awareness. A 2014 study showed that 78% of Americans did not recognize financial abuse as a form of domestic violence, which we talked about earlier, but also can be, a major barrier to moving forward.
Sarah, when we look at the long term, so we've kind of talked about what some of the immediate impacts and fallouts might be. So if we shift our focus to long-term impacts, what are some of the personal banking realities that a victim or survivor might face when they're leaving an abusive situation where there's economic control or abuse?
Well, like I mentioned before, damage to credit history can last for years, if not to the rest of your life. That can be a really, really hard hole to dig out of if you've been abused in that way. If you've either been forced to put all of the bills in your name and then not pay them, or you've had signed to loans or credit cards that you didn't necessarily want. All those things can affect your credit history. And that can make it much harder in the future to have housing and to get a credit card in your name only and to support your family, get a car loan so that you can transport yourself back and forth to work. All of those things come back to your credit history, and it can be very tough to dig out of that hole. Also, a very practical banking thing is that you could have a really hard time opening your own bank account. If your abuser has overdrafted multiple banking accounts with your name on them, or not paid back loans to certain banks, it can be really hard for you individually to go in and get another bank account just for you. And a lot of the time, if you are willing to be honest with your story, banks will work with you, but it is very hard. And emotionally, it is extremely difficult to put yourself out there like that when you're trying to reestablish yourself financially. So it all plays together. And I would love to say that the abuse stops as soon as you leave the abusive situation, but the reality is financial abuse has long-term effects.
We've also heard stories from some of our clients, some of our residents in the transitional housing program, that they're afraid to use traditional banking methods and want to deal in cash and cash only because the abuser has screwed with their banking and their credit history so much that they're afraid that they're going to figure out how to gain access. And if you think about it, they probably could. They have their social security number, and once you have some of that information, it's easier to do that. Is that right, Sarah?
Absolutely, especially when it comes to opening credit cards in your name. If an abuser has the information, birthday, social security number, and some other basic information, it is quite possible for an abuser to open credit cards without your knowledge. I would love to say that you could go into any local bank branch, and if an abuser were to ask a teller, I want information, or I want money from my wife or girlfriend's or partner's account, hopefully the teller will tell them no. But that gets really sticky when it comes to separating finances of an established customer where both partners are known by the bank branch. That can be really gray, and it's not the easiest situation to deal with, especially if you're trying to leave an abusive situation. And it does require a certain amount of vulnerability and honesty with you, and quite frankly, possibly a stranger, the bank teller, and saying, hey, I'm in this situation. We're separating, and I don't necessarily want him being able to access this new account that I'm opening. And that is hard. It's hard for any victim of any kind of abuse to be able to go in and do that and be vulnerable.
Do banks get that? Like, do they understand that there are reasons why, why couples separate, and do they help people take extra protective measures to protect their information and their account security? Is that conversation happening in the financial sector, Sarah?
Yes. And I think just strictly because if you walk into just about any bank, most of the people behind the teller line are going to be women. And we know the statistics, 1 in 4 women have been abused. So it is possible that those conversations are happening on a banking level, on a teller level. However, we do need the conversation to move a little bit past that. And we need some of the regulations and some of the laws behind financial stability for women to support women and to give us the best chance we have to leave a relationship with what we deserve, which in my opinion is what we've earned and what we need to immediately support ourselves.
Sandra, I want to ask you about job training and work history. What are some of the resources that you may have or that may be available in the community? How do you help somebody kind of repair that work history or sell themselves to a new possible employer about maybe a broken work history or a lack of education? Maybe they're still 6 credits away from finishing their degree.
Well, there are some programs within the community that are helping clients to find a better training, and it's a training that it's I'd say up to date, that will help them stand out of the crowd. One of the challenges that I see most of the clients have is that they have been out of the workforce for so long that things have changed in the field. Like I had a client that she was looking at nursing, and there's so many changes in the nursing field, like even technology, knowledge, studies, all kinds of things that have changed. And now that she's trying to come out and regain the re-entry to the workforce, she's faced with this, I don't know these things. So that's one of the challenges, that she's not up to par with everybody else that has been in the field and it's aware of the changes. So it's finding a place that she can get this knowledge that can help her really stand out of the crowd, like I said. And there's programs that will help clients connect directly with employers that are willing to train and that support the survivors. And sometimes it's another challenge that sometimes we face as we help clients is finding employers that are receptive or that they are supportive to what our clients have suffered. Not that we want to go out there and tell them the whole story and kind of expose the client that way, but somebody that's willing to work with them. I have faced many barriers as far as somebody, an employer, knowing that a client had suffered from domestic violence. The first thing that I asked was, is she going to be able to show up to work? Is she gonna be responsible? Is she's gonna be, and sometimes they have that in the back of their mind, I think, is that this client is just not gonna be good because she's facing or dealing with all the issues at home. So finding the right employer for them, it's could be challenging, but it's definitely, it's there's a lot of programs working with the working on these problems and issues for the survivors right now.
So a statistic that I've seen is that nearly 8 million days of paid work each year is lost due to domestic violence. That's the equivalent of more than 32,000 full-time jobs. And then more than 90% of United States workplaces do not have a formal program or policy that addresses that workplace violence or the abuse that victims might be experiencing. Have you found, Sandra, in the community that there are workplaces that get it, that are more supportive of people who are experiencing violence in their relationships, that they understand, what's going on and try and be more flexible or work with them, knowing that this is 1 in 4 women, so if we're half the workforce population, it's a pretty significant number. Like, do they get it?
To be honest with you, I think we're making progress on this, because I think more of a lot more people are aware of it, and it's willing to work with the survivors. But it has been kind of challenging, because I think it's the first thing they think about, and probably if they look at the statistics, they'll probably think about that they're not going to show up to work. So, but yeah, we have found places that we can direct clients that will feel supported and able to, perform and gain the job. So yeah, it's happening. Thankfully, it's getting better. But as CAP is starting a couple of different programs for single moms, that's also helpful. That they're gonna be able to be paired up with the right training and the right employer that's gonna be that's willing to help and to support them as well.
So that I haven't heard this. Will that information be forthcoming?
Yes.
Like, how will we know about that? Do you
know? CAP will launch a program, and it might be a safe way. It's called the 2Gen program. It's coming up, and it's focused more on single parents. It's more for females, as single moms that want to regain the re-entry to the workforce. So, and we're still in the works of the program. So, but it would be something that it will be for them to focus on training, and it goes along with helping the children also get have a schooling or training or in a sense helping them with the learning. So okay. It's gonna be a big combination of a lot of services that CAP provides. But yes, coming up, and that'll be one of them. We also have another program. It's called Lift, again for single moms that are trying again to re-entry to the workforce, and it's through a company that decided to work with us. It's 4 seasons, so moms will have access to first shift. That's another issue about the entry levels of work the clients are going to. Sometimes they face the challenges of not having the work history, and they just get hired for a level entry position, which is lower wages and usually not even enough to actually provide for the family. So there's other programs that we have will be they will be able to work first shift. There will be living wages, and they will have the opportunity to actually gain full-time employment once the program is over.
Great. It's great to hear that the community is starting to come alive, or that at least we're becoming more aware. Maybe it's always been out there, but that we're becoming more aware of some of those opportunities. And obviously that's some of what we at DVS will continue to do. Sandra, I know that you need to go on to another meeting, so I'm going to finish up with Randi, Elizabeth, and Sarah, but I do want to say thank you to you for joining us this evening and being part of the conversation, and sharing your expertise on many levels. So thank you. And
my pleasure. Thank you.
so Randi, I'm going to bring you into the conversation now. You've been doing this work for nearly 20 years at Tabor. Is there a victim or a survivor who maybe you think of when you think about this conversation? What were some of the long-term challenges or barriers that they experienced, and how were you able to help them?
Thank you, by the way, for inviting me to the conversation. So over the last 20 years, I've worked with a lot of survivors and people who are transitioning out of these types of situations. And you mentioned so many of the long-term effects and fallouts from everything from work history to credit. So one of the people that I worked with some time ago, she was in her 50s, so it was a long-term relationship. Her children were grown, but she decided to take the steps to leave a situation which left her feeling very vulnerable. Like you said, the lack of control in her own life. And so one of the first things that I found when I started to discuss these things with her was I just needed to give her a little bit of hope and optimism that she didn't feel as though she had to return to that situation, that she could take back that control. She could overcome some of these issues with just a little bit of steady and steady work, a little bit of help potentially with mapping out the finances, which is essentially in the Financial Empowerment Center. One of the things that we've done for a really long time is just try to help map out the income versus expenses and come up with a realistic plan and goal to achieve all of those things. As I was listening to the stories and as I listened to the video, I just kind of, you can imagine just starting all over and just say, you're graduating high school and you're getting ready to go to college. You're filled with optimism and hope about the situation. It's this great, huge transition. But when you're leaving a situation like this, and it just feels probably the exact opposite. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of anxiety about whether or not I can even do this anymore because I've been so reliant on someone else for just about everything in my life. Like she mentioned in the video, I mean, she had to rely on him for gas and for food, and so starting over is a huge challenge, but these survivors overcome it every day, and their stories can help the next person become the next survivor and create a chain reaction, so to speak. At Tabor, some of the things that we try to focus on, obviously, is housing first. So what can we do to help transition, and what can, what methods could we use to try to overcome, whether it's eviction history or that poor credit history. There are programs that we have that can help get past some of that. We work really, we work alongside a lot of the affordable housing units, and so we have a way to understand what it is that they're looking for a tenant, and um, how we can help someone transition into those things. Um,
Do you find that rent property owners are open to helping, people who have experienced abuse, who are, really struggling, or, wanting or needing to start over their lives? Do you think that the rental community is open to that experience and supporting individuals in that way?
I do. Lancaster has a lot of private landlord situations that, um, they still have to follow the same type of fair housing, and give people equal opportunity. Unfortunately, sometimes you may not be the first person to fill out the application who is eligible, and so those things can factor in. But I do believe that the Lancaster community is a very um, collaborative community who does absolutely want to make sure that um, people experiencing this type of abuse have a safe place to go. Um, you're going to run into challenges when it comes to, maybe having to have 3 times the income. I mean, they still have to follow certain guidelines. So if the wages aren't quite high enough, they're, even though they may want to help you, you know they they still have to follow the guidelines, especially if you're talking to a property management company, or um, or some type of third party that is helping to manage whatever units that they have available. But I do believe um, that if we can find ways to, or uh, to show them that they have the ability to make that monthly payment every month, that we can certainly advocate on behalf of someone who's in a transitional situation such as this.
That's great to hear that there are property owners out there, because we know, with the work that we do and working with the high number of people who come to our program who are homeless. That's one of the challenges and struggles that we see with our clients every day as well. So you help people with housing. What are some of the other ways that you've helped people? Do you help people with like their credit history and credit repair and things like that? Because Sarah mentioned earlier how critical that is.
Yeah, absolutely. We have done a program called debt management for since 1988. So we've had a lot of experience with it, and um, it was, some people also know it as credit counseling, and that is something that I've been associated with ever since I came to Tabor. And we just try to help them map out a way to either repair that history by repaying, or creating some kind of a plan or objective to, um, uh, whether it's slowly or methodically, just start to improve that credit, so that when that application becomes available, or when that affordable housing unit is, their name comes up on the list, that they become the viable candidate that they need to become in order to transition. But credit can affect other things. It can affect your ability to land that job. It can affect your ability to get a decent car insurance rate. It does have a lasting impact. So the more that we can do to try to um, create a more viable situation, uh, the the better that survivor can continue to um, develop economically safe and transitional a move forward.
Sarah, can I ask you, we all know, I think a lot of people know about the importance of thinking ahead and planning ahead. And that can be really challenging for somebody who has lived their life day to day and not sure what the future holds, and not like they haven't had that ability maybe to really think ahead or think beyond today. Retirement and savings accounts and things like that, like how would somebody with maybe really limited resources and limited access, maybe a bad, a not so stable credit history, how would they be able to start investing or saving for the future, in a personal banking sort of situation? I think you do this frequently, right?
Yes. The best way to save for the future long term is definitely to invest or choose an option if your job offers a 401k option to do that. And that is would be strictly controlled by the person who opens that account, the person who works that job. You could put a beneficiary on that account. That could be your child or it could be somebody else. But it would not have anything to do with a previous abuser, even if they are legally married. It wouldn't have anything to do with his or her name, your abuser's name. And then being able to work through, when it comes to just opening a bank account and a savings account, figuring out what your current financial status looks like. Did you have accounts accounts at other banks in the past that have been overdrawn and stayed overdrawn? If you have, that could impact your ability to open a new bank account at a new bank. So you have to figure out what that is, kind of take a really hard look at the choices you've made in the past and deal with them so that you can move forward in a fresh start. And that could require paying back that money that has sat at an old bank from an old bank account that may have had your abuser's name on it, and kind of dealing with that in a way that is good for your future. And it sounds like that's a lot of the work that Randi does at Tabor, and that's awesome. I didn't know about those programs before this call, so thank you for informing me.
So let me make sure I'm understanding correctly. So an old bank account, maybe with some overdraft fees and like all of that sort of thing, if that's still hanging out there and the victim's name is affiliated with it, like they may have to take care of all of that before they can kind of start new?
Yes. Yes, that is a possibility. Now, some banks, I briefly mentioned this earlier, some banks will work with a victim of domestic violence if that victim is willing to be vulnerable and forthcoming with the situation, and maybe write a letter or deal with it in another way, make a payment plan for half. It is possible that banks will work with victims in that way, but it still needs to be taken care of in some capacity. And that can be really hard, especially if you're not sure which bank you might owe money to. It can be tough to figure that out. A lot of the time, it shows up on your credit history at some point.
So Randi, when you're working with clients, is there a report that you run somehow that would pull all of that information to see what's out there?
Absolutely. We run a credit report from all of the 3 different credit reporting agencies, TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. We're also able to we could run them separately and through a program like Annual Credit Report, which is a free service that anyone can access once a year. They're entitled to get a free credit report. Or we also have our own version of what we call a tri-merge report, which gives us access to all 3 plus a credit score. And we have all of us have been certified through the National Foundation for Credit Counseling to understand the impacts of whatever we see on that report, prioritize it, and develop a plan to change the long-term effects of that. So,
do those old banking things show up on a credit report, like the Equifax or?
Most of the time, yes. There is sometimes a check systems report that could also impact someone's ability to open up the bank account, which doesn't always show up on the credit report. It may have expired off of there because it's that much older. But there are some programs through local credit unions and local banks that will allow them to maybe take a class or what they call bank on it type of programs that will allow them to, if they get the education piece, then they can open up a separate account or a new bank account.
Okay. So Randi and Sarah, you both have talked about, you both used the word vulnerability, and the vulnerability that it takes to bring this forward, to talk with creditors or bankers about their situation. Sarah, I'm going to ask you first. From the banking perspective, like, how does that work? How have you seen that kind of play out? And I guess how have victims been treated?
In my personal experience, I've seen a few women come into a bank branch and be vulnerable with the teller or the banker or the branch manager even, and that situation gets handled in an appropriate manner to best help that victim. And that's really encouraging to me, because I think part of emotional and mental abuse is the fact that, the person that's being abused is made to feel crazy, made to feel like there's no help out there for them. Nobody's going to believe them or help them. So being able to go in and handle something that's already so tied up with your emotions, such as money, in a way that you're getting the help you need is very encouraging. And I think that it's something that we need more of. But I've been encouraged by the way I've seen it handled in the past.
We know, like, trauma histories are very much sometimes connected to our money and how we view money and finances and things like that. Randi, how have you helped some of those, vulnerable people? You said those are delicate conversations, I assume. What has your experience been in helping, people in those vulnerable situations and having those conversations?
I think, one of the great things is sometimes as they're starting to work through this process, just taking one step at a time and having one little success just leads to another success, which leads to another success. And, sort of helps relieve some of the fear and anxiety. Sometimes just that one conversation with a creditor that goes okay, and they don't have to have the fear and anxiety to call the next creditor. It's all these, little steps that you take that just can ultimately lead to transformation.
Great. And Elizabeth, I'm going to end the conversation with you. What are your position is new at DVS? Have you given any thought to, some of the things that you would maybe like to see happen, and maybe some of the ways that we can really hone in supporting victims and survivors through the work that you're doing?
So I think this discussion is a first great step. I love how we have built kind of a relationship with everyone here, and continuing to build those partnerships, I think will be a huge help for DVS. And just in the brief time that I've been here, I've noticed credit counseling is probably one of the biggest things that that survivors could use, because everything stems from your credit. So I think that's a good first step. And like I said, partnering with Randi and Sarah and the rest of the community to just take those little steps to continue to build credit and then get their finances back on track.
So I think that's a great way to segue into saying thank you to each of you, Elizabeth, Randi, Sarah, and Sandra, who had to leave our conversation. And to also let the community know that they have a role here too. Obviously, that's something that I feel very strongly about. We're doing this work both to, providing those direct services to victims and survivors, and we can't do that work without the support of the community. And that happens with, people who are willing to volunteer, like Sarah has joined us, agencies who are willing to partner with us and help provide those additional services and expertise to our clients, like Randi at Tabor and Sandra through navigation at CAP. And also the private sector, banks, businesses, employers, property owners. All of that is really important as we help people navigate through finding their independence. We know that these are the things that they need. And so we will continue to reach out and call on our community to help support us in providing better services and to supporting victims as they're leaving abusive relationships. There's also things that individuals can do. Like I said, volunteering is one of those things, but also supporting the agency in other ways. And so tonight we're announcing the Purple Purse silent auction. And I'm sure that you'll be seeing more social media posts about this. The Allstate Foundation provides purple purses to domestic violence programs, a limited number of them each year. And it's an opportunity for them to use it as a fundraiser. And so we have a purple purse that's going to be auctioned, and that money will then seed economic empowerment support services for the victims that Elizabeth and the rest of our staff will be working with. And that's one way that the community, you as individuals who are seeing this conversation tonight, that's one way that you might be able to contribute, is by, going to the silent auction and bidding on the purse. We obviously accept donations throughout the year, and your support in talking about domestic violence, just bringing it from the shadows and having these conversations with your peers, with your coworkers, with people we must be able to talk about this in order to help victims feel like they can also come forward and that they're going to be supported when they do that. So please go to our Domestic Violence Awareness Month website. It's caplank.org/DVAM. It's all over our social media. We have some other events still planned for DV Awareness Month this month, and some videos have already been posted, but there's lots of information that you can find there. We also, when we talk about community support, we have about a dozen coffee houses around the community who are working with us this month to educate the community and bring awareness to the issue. So please go and patron those coffee shops in your areas. We all must, we all as a community need to come together to resolve this and to make the community safer for everyone. So we thank you for that. We thank you for tuning in tonight, and look forward to engaging with you in the future. thanks to all of you for being on the panel tonight. We'll see you soon.
The impact of economic abuse often is that the victim is not able to escape the abusive situation, even if they want to. So once they've made the decision that they want to leave the abuser, the economics of the situation may prevent them from doing so. This means that their ability to work, again, has been compromised. They won't have the money, security deposit, first month's rent, even second month's rent, to secure their own place to live. Their credit has been compromised, their credit score has been compromised. There may be debt in their name that was run up by the abusive person. Just so many areas where the economics of the situation are going to hold them back from being able to make their own decisions.
Dealing with victims or working with victims that are financially abused is probably the most difficult of victims, simply because they don't know how to get out. They rely on that person for all financial needs and things like that. And so they're afraid that they have no resources, they have nowhere to go. They depend on that person for everything. And it's very difficult.
But every purse has a story, and purses are sort of a universal thing. But purses are something that we collect, that reflect our personalities. And sometimes it's even hard to part with them.
So personally, my purse is my freedom.
My purse is my lifeline.
That is my personal space. That is what my life is basically is in there.
When I think of a purse, I'm very much in charge of my own purse, because that's very important to me, knowing that having charge of my own finances gives me independence and autonomy and gives me choices that I wouldn't have without that kind of financial freedom.
To me, my purse means everything to me.
When I think about it, a reflection of the different life stages that I've moved through.
Because it's a place, it's my space. Even if I share a home with someone, my purse is my space where I keep my personal things.
I'm going through my purse and going through my personal belongings in my purse is like an invasion of my personal space. And so I'm being further victimized through that when the abuser is going through my purse. It's just like there is no privacy for me. There is nothing that I can have that would actually help me feel safe or secure. Like there is no me. There is no me.
Literally, it means everything to me. If somebody was to take my purse, I think I would be probably lost, because most of my information that I need in my life is in my purse.
This is the purple purse that we will be auctioning off during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I think it's great. Attractiveness of a purse is really important, and I think it's a really attractive purse as well as a functional crossbody bag. But it's also symbolic, right? It's symbolic of the economic advocacy work that we're going to be doing with survivors. So the proceeds from the auctioning off of the purse will go into the Survivor Economic Stability Fund. So I would encourage people to participate, not only because you might win the purse, which is really great, but also because your donation goes directly into that Economic Stability Fund, which is so important in helping survivors be able to move on from their abusive situations. So thank you very much in advance for participating.